This is DibTech Talk, a show where we make sense of all things cybersecurity for the defense industrial base. The National Defense Authorization Act mandates that the DoD support the defense industrial base by adopting a process to limit our adversaries' access to American technology. Allowing innovative and essential small and medium-sized defense companies to fall into the hands of adversarial investors would be devastating to our national security. And this is where the DoD's Trusted Capital Program steps in. The Department of Defense Industrial Policy Trusted Capital Program brings corporate suppliers that are critical to the defense industrial base together with trusted capital providers. Trusted Capital's forward-leaning approach provides these critical companies access to rapid funding at key developmental stages, preventing them from strategic funding from our adversaries. Through the Trusted Capital Marketplace, capital providers are encouraged to invest in key DoD focus areas at key growth inflection points. Stay tuned to find out more about how the Trusted Capital Program protects American innovation.
So my name is Colin Supko. I'm the director of the Department of Defense's Trusted Capital Program. A little background about me. I spent my first 11 years on active duty in the SEAL teams as an officer, graduated of the United States Naval Academy. Have spent 4 tours, 1 in Afghanistan, 3 in Iraq, and left the active service to join the Navy Reserves in 2011 to attend the Stanford Graduate School of Business. Graduated from there, immediately started my first company, raised capital from the venture community, sold that company, started another company, raised additional capital, and was running that company for the past 7 years until COVID. And that drove our revenue down to the point where I needed to put that aside, and was fortunate enough to apply to and be picked up for the White House Presidential Innovation Fellows Program. I was asked at that point by the Undersecretary of Defense to come back over to DoD as a White House Innovation Fellow and take over and build a strategy for the Trusted Capital Program looking at adversarial capital.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit first? I like to level set when I interview super smart people who know a lot of things about their section, right? Like, we don't all use the same or don't have the same vocabulary when it comes to this. So can you describe a little bit what adversarial capital is, or dark money might be, and so we can level set there and build from that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start with the definition of adversarial capital, and I'm just about to release a video on this on social media. So adversarial capital is any capital utilized by our adversaries to garner control, influence, or ownership in very important technologies that the United States needs for both economic and national security. So because we live in an open market system, the best market system in the world, our adversaries utilize legal means to gain position in our markets. We recognize that this is something that we need to be more aware of. We need to have a clear understanding. We have standards set by the FIRMA regulations and CFIUS, which...
Can you tell us what CFIUS is?
I sure can. CFIUS is a whole of government approach at understanding what type of foreign investment is coming into our country, and at a certain state, which is, I believe it's 20%, might be 25%, any foreign direct investment into a company along 27 separate technology fields important to national security and economic security needs to be self-notified. That company needs to notify the government, and the government then sits with a board of Treasury folks, Commerce folks, Defense Department folks, and a few others, looks at that investment and makes a determination on risk to the United States economic and national security. And if a risk is determined, then some actions can be taken to roll back that market-based exchange.
Yeah, is there any requirement that companies join this trusted capital
Absolutely
ecosystem,
not.
or like what is the
Yeah, there's
incentive for
absolutely
companies to
no
do this?
mandatory reason for companies to join. Companies join for two reasons. One, because they are already doing business with the government, so at least a portion of their revenue is coming from the US government. They're watching what's happening in the news with the executive orders, with things that Congress is doing, and they recognize that not only are they getting a free look from a due diligence standpoint, but they're also getting access to trusted capital, to capital that they know whose ultimate beneficial owner isn't one of our adversaries.
And so when you say they're getting a free look, is the free look from DOD?
Yeah, so when we
What does
do a
that
due
look like?
diligence look, in order to, let me back up and explain how Trusted Capital works. So Trusted Capital has three lines of effort.
Sure.
The first line of effort is the Trusted Capital digital marketplace. So we'll go down that line first. The marketplace is set up not unlike a social media dating app, with the difference being that in order to get onto the app, you have to undergo a background check, a due diligence check. That due diligence check is done online. For companies, they have to be invited by one of the military organizations, so the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, SOCOM.
So you have to have a
You have to
sponsor
have a sponsor and a
to
contract
do
with the
this
government already.
and contract.
At
Okay.
that point, the application asks about your supply chain, it asks about your capitalization table, it asks about your customers, um, it asks about your cyber hygiene. All these things come together for us to make a risk determination um, on the company itself, and whether it should be considered trusted or not to be allowed onto the marketplace. The same thing happens with venture capital funds and banks and anybody else that wants to be a capital provider on the platform. Once they get on the platform, the government is hands off. It's an open and free market where if deals can be made between capital providers and capability providers that are beneficial for both groups.
Yeah, so this is just for the
Correct.
marketplace that we're talking about, right? Like the one level over. So interesting. So they already have to have a contract with the government. So it's almost too late should you do the due diligence check
Oh
and
no,
find
it's
something
not too late.
not good.
It's actually the right time, because the companies that are coming in are like cyber phase twos or OTAs or CSOs or SETTRs. So they're at the very early stage of the acquisition process within DoD, which is the best time to
Okay.
understand this, because just because somebody has some risk associated with them doesn't mean that they, one, aren't going to get allowed into the marketplace, and it doesn't mean that the government doesn't want to do business with them. It just means that the Navy, the Army, the Air Force may want to be aware of it so they can mitigate those risks, um, utilizing other capabilities.
Yeah, so that's my next question. What happens if there are these risks identified? Does the sponsoring agency get to know about it, or does everybody in the marketplace get to see? Is there like a
There's
rating
no
scheme
rating
for level
scheme,
of
but yes,
risk?
every DoD part of the DoD organization is able to see the risks associated with each company.
Okay. And are there any, when you're assessing risk, are you leveraging any of the other risk assessment requirements for potentially other aspects of their compliance? Like, for example, the DFARS has the 7012 clause, so they should be NIST 800-171 compliant, which requires a risk assessment and, having a system security plan outlining how they provide data security. Are you able to leverage any of those existing documents to reduce duplication of efforts, or do you have your own way that you're asking
Work
for risk
directly
assessments
with
be
the DoD
completed?
organizations, the acquisitions folks, and so yeah, we have direct access to the contracts that are associated with each one of those companies via the Army, the Navy, the Air Force. We're actually, what's not in the FAR and DFAR is spelled out what those, all it says is you need to assess the risk. The problem is that nobody told them what they need to be
Hmm.
looking at.
Right.
So we're actually working directly with
That's right.
them and to let them know, hey, this is what we've determined the risks. Some of the risks are. It's not all encompassing, but it's enough standard that it allows us to make a comfortable assessment of risk to allow them into our marketplace or not. And that data is then shared across the Department of Defense.
Okay. So that's one half of the marketplace, and the other half, the matching, is the capital providers, right? And
Yeah, so
so
let's
it's
be
service providers and
really,
capital providers,
this is really
right?
important. The DOD doesn't match. We don't do matching. Matching happens
Right. Okay.
organically on the market platform itself. So the other side of it is indeed venture capital funds. We have one private equity fund. We have one financial institution that offers mezzanine debt, convertible debt, things of that nature. And we're about to have one that's going to be a nonprofit that's going to offer grants.
Okay. So what is, and I'm not trying to sound flippant, but what is the point of this marketplace? Is it because DoD wants to ensure that that capabilities and cool technologies that we want to harvest and use eventually, we want to make sure that they're funded by some sort of capitalist, and so we want to make sure that it's funded through none of our own money, and so we're trying to help other people, help these two groups come together to create hopefully technology that we can use.
Yeah, so it's a
Is that
great question.
I
So
guess the
the real
point of
question
it?
is, why trusted capital? Why? And the answer is
Yeah.
threefold. One, it's because we have a consolidation of the defense industrial base happening, right? We have fewer companies offering their services to the Defense Department. And that happens because we've lost some of that connective tissue with the broader national security innovation base because of the difficulty of doing business with the government. The second is that we are aware that private capital investments within the US innovation ecosystem are one-sided, meaning most of the venture capital is actually flowing into software companies versus hardware companies. That poses a major issue, as you've heard and as you've probably seen in some of the executive orders and even some of the most previous bill passed by the Senate getting after some of the innovation issues, is that our market forces have created a imbalance in capital flow to software versus hardware because software has 80% margins where high hardware margins are around 30%. So this is a opportunity for money flow to flow directly into some of these hardware-based companies that have a government check in the box and a government contract. And finally, and
So are you only, sorry to
no,
interrupt, are you only
not at
allowing
all,
hardware providers into
not
this
at all.
marketplace?
But I would say that we
Okay.
have more hardware companies than you'll find in the broader market that are seeking venture capital investment.
So I know that DoD is not matching here, but it sounds like DoD has the ability to let some people in and not others in. So are you attempting to level set or to bring up the deficit of hardware providers
Absolutely not.
by allowing more of them in? Like, why are there more hardware providers in the marketplace
Because
than software providers?
yeah,
Is it
I would
because
say no,
they're the
because
ones who have problems
inevitably
finding
the
capital?
DoD is equally as interested in hardware as it is software versus the broader market.
Interesting. Do you think that something like a trusted capital program for private sector should be considered? Because it sounds like if obviously this is important to our supply chain and national security, but CFIUS cares about all industries, not necessarily just the defense sector or just the supply chain for the federal government. They care about critical technologies for the United States as a whole. Is there any effort underway to bring this to normal businesses who are seeking capital, who might be part of this,
Yeah,
who might be
it's a
subject to
great question, and
CFIUS,
I will tell you
also
that
looking for
yes,
trusted
there
capital?
is indeed draft legislation to broaden this program to do just that. And a private side doing it would be equally as beneficial, just for the well-being of both capital
Right.
providers and capability providers. And more than that, I
No,
just
absolutely.
had the opportunity to
How long?
brief some of our NATO
Mhm.
allies yesterday, um, and to effectively create a broad ecosystem that is global, especially with our allies. Um, if all of us as nations dump all this money into innovation, but we don't invest in the ability to protect and monitor that money and those innovations that are occurring within our borders, then we risk the opportunity of spending all that money in RDT&E just to have an adversary steal it, and build upon it and save themselves all of that money and time by just taking our technology.
Right. So how does, and we don't have to go down this path because I feel like it could go on forever. Um, how do, um, how does this effort partner, marry, or complement the CMMC effort with OUST ANS, pushing these additional DFARS clauses, requiring everyone, because you're talking about protecting IP and protecting these innovative companies. Well, they're all going to be subject to the CMMC, right? And that, so I just wrote a report that was published on Monday with IPC, which IPC represents digital manufacturers. And about 25% of their members who responded to the survey said that they were going to have to leave the supply chain due to the costs associated with CMMC potentially. So, is there any attempt here to offset those CMMC costs but still protect the IP? Or is this haven't?
Yeah, great question. So I am not a CMMC guy, but the standards that were put out by NIST, are so important to our broader national security, um, that there is, I think, a crossover between where trusted capital comes into play and the requirements that necessitate CMMC certification to ensure that, indeed our companies that are doing business with the government, are protecting themselves. And so I think that over the next few months, you're going to start to see, the system start to flow, and potentially some opportunities for companies who believe that the cost of CMMC certification is too great for them to invest in, that something might be able to be done about that.
Okay, interesting. So, so the marketplace is the first LOE. So what's the second LOE that you guys are working on?
Yeah, so we are just about to launch the Trusted Capital Innovation Tours program, which will allow DoD personnel to gain greater industry insight and increased understanding of industry due diligence and enhanced relationships across key nodes of the innovation ecosystem by spending 12 months working in participating venture capital firms.
Interesting. And this is open to government employees or DoD employees?
This will be open to DoD uniformed members.
Cool. And
Yeah, we're really looking forward to it. We think
yeah.
it's going to be a great way to build some of that connected ecosystem with this very key node of our innovation ecosystem, which is the venture funds.
So how do the DoD personnel get involved in this? Is it an application process? Or are they picked based on their qualifications and their existing experience?
Yep, all of that information will be forthcoming within the next few weeks.
Okay. Cool. And I'm assuming, already have some VC firms lined up to participate.
Thus far, I believe the number is up to 37 now.
Can you tell me the grade requirements for this yet, or do you have or does it matter?
All that information will be forthcoming.
Open to reservists or just active duty?
All that information will be forthcoming.
My recommendation, unsolicited advice, is to open it to reservists. The reserves. You're a reservist. I'm a reservist. I look like a dirtbag because I haven't finished ILE, but I have an MBA and a master's degree, and I'm applying to law school. But their loss for not promoting me to lieutenant. I haven't been not selected yet, but I feel like it's
don't
coming. It's
don't
coming.
don't count yourself out. And indeed, I think this is a great program, if executed appropriately by the reserve component, to give back to Army Futures Command or Naval X or AFWorks. great opportunities here for a reserve component.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the reserves are often overlooked, but they are. Uh, Short tidbit: my little brother joined the army during college, and he was with an engineer unit, a reserve engineer unit, and they got deployed to Iraq. And it was only because they were reservists and full time. These people were were carpenters, were plumbers, were roofers, that they were able to do what they did in Iraq to rebuild stuff. Had they just been active duty and only had the army training, they wouldn't have any of those qualifications. So,
I mean,
um, that's
100%.
awesome.
I mean, I served with some amazing Marines and Army folks in El Anbar province who, in their day jobs, were either working for construction companies or were police officers. And so when they came over to do the work that we were doing in El Anbar, um, we couldn't have asked for a better group of people that understood both how to help rebuild Anbar province and how to help police it. So yeah, there's a special place. There should be a special place in America's heart for their reserve component. Citizen
100% agree.
soldiers, really. Okay,
Absolutely.
so
So good. I'm glad we agree on that. Yes. So what's the third LOE?
the last LOEs are Trusted Capital Incentives Program. So
Okay.
we have identified key incentives that may be able to provide fiduciary reasons for both capital providers and capability providers to participate in the Trusted Capital Program.
Okay.
And we believe without market-based incentives, there might be limited reason for enduring participation in the program over the long run. But we'll have to see. So we are actively engaged in working within government to look at fiduciary incentives to be a part of the ecosystem.
No, that makes sense because that was one of my first questions. Like, is there a requirement to do this? Why would I do it? So how back to how you get people, and I know you're looking at fiduciary reasons, financial, like get them, incentivize them in some financial way. But how does the Army, Air Force, Navy, Marines, how do they know that they can sponsor companies for this program? How is there an education component part of this for the
Oh
components?
yeah, I work on a weekly basis with my connections in Army Futures Command, AFWorks, Naval X, SOCOM, and this program is being pushed even from the top, from the service acquisition executives down. And so, although there's still folks within the ecosystem that are unaware. Most of the folks that are working in SIBRs or working with OTAs, SDTTRs from an acquisition standpoint, are aware and starting to recognize that we provide a tool for them when they're having to look at their FAR and DFAR and figure out what their risks are. And we're actually doing that due diligence for them and being able to provide that to them so they have a much clearer understanding of things that they didn't even know they should be asking.
So, what are the parameters for the types of companies that can enter the marketplace, into this trusted capital marketplace? Is there a, do they have to be within a certain industry? Like, are there good boundaries for who can participate
Yeah, if you
besides
go
having
to
a
the Trusted
sponsor?
Capital website, you'll see a list of technology fields.
Okay.
Companies need to be privately held, S corps, C corps, or even LLCs, because LLCs can quickly be turned into C corps as required if a company is going to take investment. Um, S corps are not liked as much by venture funds because S corps are not able to provide different types of stock purchase agreements, preferred versus non-preferred. But nonetheless, that's the base types of companies and industries that we're looking for.
Can you, because you have a business background, and I just finished my MBA, so I'm
Nice.
hot off that trail. Can you describe a little bit about why it's important to vet the capital going into these companies and what VCs do, and why getting bad VCs, bad money involved in these organizations, why that is so important?
Absolutely. So the venture capital community is one of the most important um, nodes of our innovation ecosystem. As a prior entrepreneur, without capital, you're dead in the water. Capital is the lifeblood of our innovation ecosystem, and our venture funds are the keynodes that are making determinations on where their capital is going to flow. That capital is not based off of patriotism. That capital is not based off of anything other than perceived return on investment and where they believe the future is going and what has the greatest market potential. So why it's important that the capital that we as entrepreneurs are taking comes from a trusted source is because if I'm a venture fund who has 40% of my fund is an adversary investment group whose strategy and policy of my state is to figure out how to gain access to intellectual property, and I have made clear to this VC group what I want my money to be invested in, then now my company becomes potentially put on a list where you can be targeted for cyber espionage. There can be additional M&A events that will potentially take place, and the nation as a whole and potentially your company can lose value. If the next thing you know, one of our adversaries has copied your company, and this has happened to friends of mine in the Valley, and now they're out operating in other parts of the world, sucking up market share that could be yours.
So that's one angle of why VCs should be vetted. What roles do venture capitalists play when they make a major play with a company or give significant amount of funds that give them a large portion of that company? What do these VCs do? Because the return on investment and the future. So surely they're not just handing over money and saying, I want to see my 30% return or 50, whatever their expected ROI is here. What role can
10x.
VCs play?
They're looking for 10x.
And is that part of?
So again, if you, as I'm sure you're aware, and I think this is where you're going, VCs who lead around are always going to take board seats, right? So when we look at foreign ownership, control, and influence, the influence is the hardest part to measure, right? Just because on your board you have a VC who's sitting, you may be unaware that in that VC's ear is some limited partner who is funding that venture capital fund and is threatening to pull their money in the next fund if the VC doesn't act in a certain way or advise you to do certain things, right? This is the hardest part about this business, is the influence piece. The ownership and control, well, we can see that on a cap table. A capitalization table, you're aware what a capitalization table is, I'm assuming? Yeah. So on the cap table, you can understand, who owns the company and who controls the company. What you can't always see is who influences the company. So it's imperative as an entrepreneur to understand where your VC is getting their money from. Who are their limited partners?
Right. And also what their goal is, right? Are they going to squeeze every last dollar out of the company, force you to restructure, and then try to force you to sell it, right? Or do, something that is counter to your goal. So is there any way to, influence is hard to gauge, but surely there's some sort of history considered for these VCs. Like, what have they done with other companies?
Correct. So one of our questions that we ask on the application for VCs are, tell us about any M&A events you've had or exits, and countries that your companies have exited from, right? Because it tells us something if in the past 10 years you've had 20 exits and 17 of them have gone to China.
Right. So, okay. So we both agree this is a great idea, obviously, and it's very much needed. Is there a capacity? Is there a point where so many people are, banging down the door to be a part of this trusted capital program? Do you guys have the throughput to put everyone through the ringer?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, as with anything else, you have technology that's going to be a limiting factor, and you have manpower that's going to be a limiting factor, right? So as we continue to figure out how to build the best data pools, and how to utilize open source information to verify the information that we're getting from these companies is accurate, it requires manpower, right? Full-time employees that are subject matter experts that have come from Wall Street and other banking industries that can do the type of research to figure out who the ultimate beneficial owner is, so on and so forth. And over time, as we start to train our AI systems on what to look for or what red flags that they should be making aware for the human in the loop, hopefully that that time that it takes starts to decrease. So right now we get the due diligence done on companies that come through in no more than 2 weeks.
Okay. That's good to know. And how old is this? This is a new
We have
thing, right?
been, the website and the marketplace went live mid-January, so a little over 5 months.
Wow, this year has flown by because I could have sworn that was like last month, but okay, cool. So it takes 2 weeks to get through the vetting process for both the capital fund
Yep.
and the providers or the companies. Okay. And how many can you talk about how many people
Yeah,
participate
absolutely.
currently
Yeah.
in this
Currently,
ecosystem?
we have 62 capability providers and 16 capital providers. We've had eight companies
Okay.
have been rejected for one reason or another. We have about 1.2 billion in total funding capacity between all of our capital providers. Obviously, 6 DoD organizations are our stakeholders right now. And currently we have 10 critical technology sectors represented across the 62 companies, from AI to autonomy to space to hypersonics, logistics technology, so on and so forth.
And what are some of the like minimum credentials for the venture capitalists, right? Like, can I pool some of me and my friends together and put all of our cash? What's our threshold for investing
Yeah, it's a great
to get
question.
in?
Currently, we have a cap, a minimum investment fund of 10 million.
Okay.
But we are looking at potentially lowering that for high net worth individuals that are willing to go through due diligence process and then invest in some of these companies.
Okay. Interesting. And how are you reaching out to these high net worth individuals potentially to let them know that this
We're not
is
reaching out to them;
available?
they're reaching out to us. And thus far, our advice is, hey, there's a lot of these funds out there that you can become a limited partner in, or you can establish your own fund as well to do this with some of your other high net worth individual buddies.
That's cool. I'm going to share this with my Cornell network because I know some people that work for VCs and are probably very interested and may not have any idea that this
Yeah,
is
no,
a thing. So
please do.
this is very exciting.
And this is a really important key factor. I'm assuming you're aware of limited partner agreements, right? So, in
Yes.
many of these limited partner agreements, the limited partners themselves don't want the VC sharing that they've invested. So every venture fund that's part of Trusted Capital has had to go back to the limited partner and be given permission to let us know that they're a limited partner in the VC fund.
Interesting. Okay. Cool. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you think is important or relevant? Because
Oh,
we're coming
wow.
up at 45 minutes. We have a ton of great information. I think this is fantastic, but I just want to make sure that we haven't left anything off the table that you want people to know
Um,
about.
I want to say thank you. You've done a great job. It's obvious that you have an amazing background, so it's been a real pleasure. And I think the thing I want to leave everybody with is a quote that Ben Franklin used in the Second Continental Congress when he said, "If we don't surely hang together, we will assuredly hang together." This is not a fight between government and the free market. This is a public-private partnership in which we are trying to make safe both our economic security and our national security. And inevitably, this is going to have a positive impact, we believe, on return on investment as things are happening quickly here in DC, in the legislative branch, and in the executive branch around supply chain risk, around investment into our future from an innovation standpoint as a nation. And this is just a tool to make all of that come together. So anybody's participation is greatly appreciated. And inevitably, we've gotten amazing feedback from both companies who've emailed me and said, I had a list of VCs that I was going to go to, and this has catapulted my callbacks by tenfold. And many of these companies are already in due diligence with some of the VC funds, and the VC funds are using this as a marketing tool to say, hey, we're part of the DOD's Trusted Capital Program. We've already been vetted, which means that they're getting deal flow flowing their direction because of that.
Yeah, I was just going to ask one last question. Is the marketplace public? Like, can I, if I'm not in the marketplace, go check out the marketplace to see these
So
vetted
no, it is
VC
not
firms?
public. The marketplace is on a GovCloud IL4 platform. It's got a public-facing view, in which side capital providers can get to it from the public-facing side. Capability providers have to be sent a invite to fill out the application and move from there. And then we don't share companies or capability providers that are on the marketplace because we don't feel it's our position to do so. But most of them, if not all of them, have marketed on their social media or on their websites.